Okay, here's an overview of the cases system in Stemmons Enterprise. When we think of cases, we're really thinking about to-do lists and task lists. And when we think about how that happens in a normal organization, we have a lot of different versions of something that is essentially very similar. It doesn't matter the department, how people are holding it. It might be in a spreadsheet or it might be in their Outlook. But basically, each one of these lists, regardless of what it's being used for, has columns across the top and items down the side. And that structure is basically the same for all of them. Another thing that's interesting about it is when you think about all these different columns, regardless of the use of the list or the nature of the items that are on it, is if we look in an organization, what we're going to find is that a lot of these things are the same. And they're the same in a couple of different ways. The first group that I'm talking about are things that we think of as inherent. And so we're talking about things like title, due date, assigned to, maybe status, and so on. And if we look at a certain number of lists, these things exist on almost every one of them. Maybe every once in a while we might not have a due date on a certain list, but these are kind of things that are baked into the idea of having a task list in the first place. And so we put that into the cases system automatically. They're always there, and sure, you can turn them off, but generally speaking, that's the way we manage lists. Now, another kind of commonality that we see among different lists is that we have things within the organization that are similar. So we think of these as enterprise level. And the kinds of things we might see there would be things like customer, maybe location, if your company has a bunch of different locations, business unit, vendor. And these are things that relate to the company overall. We won't see them on every list, but they tend to pop up on more than a few. And usually these are things that come from some other source of data. Maybe it's in Stemmons or maybe it's a third-party system, but these are things that help describe the overall organization, and these are typically part of the enterprise taxonomy. And then the last kind of thing that shows up on the list are things that are very specific, that really don't show up on all the lists. And it would have office, supply, type. And that's really only going to show up on the first one. Maybe one of these is related to work orders. So you might have work order type, and that would only show up on that one, and so on and so forth. Really, we should be able to add anything we want to specific lists, and we think of those as specific items. Now, what cases allows us to do is to create a case type, and case type A, and it gets all of the inherent stuff. We can choose the enterprise things that we want, and then we can make up specific things that would be on that list, and we create that case type in the system, and now we're able to manage it as if it's its own individual to-do list. So after this is all set up, what we wind up with is a database called cases, and with each case type, it has a bunch of records, etc. So we're going to look at a few different things that relate to this kind of centralized or universal task list. The first thing is, how do we create the cases? Not the case types, but having configured it, how do we create them? Of course, you can do it through a browser or a mobile device. And these are kind of manual approaches. This is what everybody thinks about first. So you have a person who's typing it into an interface, and if this was the only way to do it, it would be somewhat challenging. But we have other ways, things that people are used to. For example, email. Okay, you can create an email and have that go to the system and create a case. We can also have a web form that gets put on a website. So this is something where a customer or a web user would fill it out, hit submit, and it creates a case. We have Quest, which are checklists, and Quest often has a bunch of questions, and depending on the answers, if the answer is a certain thing, then it will kick off a case. So we could kick off a bunch of cases from like an inspection or something like that. We also have Cast, which handles automated case generation. Okay, so these are things that happen regularly. We can also have a trigger. Okay, this is a little piece of code that creates a case based on certain things happening. And finally, we could have any kind of API call if we want to be a little bit more technical. But the point is, a lot of these things happen kind of without somebody having to go and manually set this up. And the more different things and different formats that we have creating cases, the more value this overall list has. And to the extent that we can take things that happen regularly or they get kicked off by some kind of process or non-human actor, and they go into the system, that's very helpful because we're not relying on individual people always creating them one by one. Now, once they're in there, it's really interesting what we can do with them. Okay, we want to be able to look at these in lots of different ways and places. So first of all, sometimes we want to look at it along a certain type of metadata. For example, we might want to see my cases that are assigned to me. We might want to see my cases that are created by me. So this is everything you've asked somebody to do. We also might want to see it by a certain type of metadata, like, for example, cases associated with a customer or with a location or with a business unit, so on and so forth. We also want to be able to interact with the caseload in different ways. So, for example, we could view it on a PC or in a browser. Okay, we could also look at it on a mobile device. We want to be able to have reports. So when we do reports, we have either facts, which is kind of the built-in system, or any other kind of BI or data visualization tool that we could use to look at it. Of course, people are very used to using email, so we can have cases come to us by email, either when we create something or when there's an update. And the email system allows us to, especially in the beginning when people are getting used to the system, it's a great way to look at things because they're used to it. So again, we have lots of different ways to kind of pull stuff out. And we think of this as a bit of a bow tie. There's one group of ways to do it where we go in and we create these things, and another way to look at them. But there's other things that happen as well when we're dealing with cases. And because we have them all in one place, we can do things in a very consistent way. So we think of a list of specific activities that we might want to do on any individual case. And typically this is, when you're looking at an individual case, there's a list of buttons across the top. You see a lot of these things here. We might want to assign it to somebody. Or we might want to close a case, or change the status, or approve it. We may also want to get an alert. So now we're going to subscribe to the case, and every time it gets updated, we'll find out about it. Or we could look at kind of what happened with it. Let's view the history. Because all of these things are in one database, we can apply these approaches to any individual case. The other thing we have is kind of a management and governance approach. So if we're dealing with cases in one place, we may want to, for example, apply some kind of escalation rule, or we might want to look at everything that's past due, or run some kind of analysis against the caseload, and generally apply some kind of governance or processes to make sure that we're managing this caseload effectively. So this is kind of the world of cases, is we're able to create cases, we're able to look at cases, and because they're all in one place, we can do a common set of things to them, and we can manage the system and the caseload and kind of everything that's going on in there with a common set of approaches. And that's cases, and there'll be more details in other areas, but that's kind of the quick overview.